Hey guys, it's Layla from Ignite and I'm here with Johnny.
Hey guys.
And in today's video, we're going to be taking you through our advice for HSC trial preparation in English. We take you through how to manage your time, how to set goals and achieve them in the lead up to your trials. We take you through our go-to advice for comprehension, how to issue spot, how to go about memorizing techniques. Then we take you through essay drafting, adaptation and memorizing. And of course, we take you through the craft of writing.
Now this was a live recording at one of our workshops that we do, and these are exclusive and intensive holiday seminars that we run. You're going to see the live footage where we had a class of students with us. We basically are going to go through, in addition to what Layla said, we're going to go through how to schedule your study preparation from weeks 1 to week 6, assuming you have 6 weeks to work with before your exam. So whether you're watching this before trials or the actual HSC, this is going to be of incredible value for you. It's the first time Layla and I have done a live recording of this type where we really unpack all of the strategy that goes behind a Band 6 level of preparation before HSC English exams. We're looking at the grand scheme of your study strategy. We're not just looking at how you study for particular sections, but how that all pieces together in conjunction with other subjects that you have to prepare for as well. So we hope you enjoy. If you do, please like and subscribe and make sure to click the bell as well so you're notified of our future videos. Please do pass it on to any friends if you think it's of value, and strap in, enjoy, and we'll see you in there.
Thanks guys.
Yeah, and just one more point. Yeah, I feel like people are so disadvantaged, especially like lower to mid, even mid to high range students, right? Besides the high ones who are going to go out and memorize and do all the work anyway. As I said, if they're not memorizing, they're doing so much practice that they effectively know what each sentence is going to be like, right? They can just adapt on the day. So unless they're doing that, or you've explicitly memorized and adapted, if you're someone who doesn't have that level of initiative, and not everyone does, and that's fine, right? You're just trying to do the best that you can do. But unless you're at that level where you take that much initiative, then unfortunately I feel like you can be very disadvantaged by, not necessarily, I'm not saying all teachers come out and say this, but a lot of people come out and they say, oh, don't memorize. Unfortunately, the top end students are benefiting from that advice because they're still doing it. I can tell you they're still doing it, and they're just going to sound way more sophisticated. It just makes sense, right? Whose sentence is going to be better? The one that's polished but adapted, right? And you know the exact spots to adapt on the day, but everything else is perfect, right? Maybe only 20% of the essay has to actually change. It's just a matter of knowing which 20%, and that is determined somewhat by the on-the-day question. But if you have 80% that's polished, because if you've done weeks of work, remember the 3 weeks editing and drafting, that's where you're making the 80% that won't change on the day. I can guarantee there'll be like 80% that will not change, just can't tell you which 80% it won't be. Do you see the trick? 80% will stay the same. So you want the 80% that stays the same to be as polished and sophisticated as possible. Okay, and that's really the key there. If you can understand that you don't know which sentences are already going to be pretty good for the question you get on the day, right? We know with certainty you're going to have to change bits of the essay, right? But you don't know which parts might stay similar and which parts will really need to be adapted. True?
But you do know 100% that your thesis and your topic sentences will be adapted to the question.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
unless
right.
you get the same question that you pre-prepared your exemplar to.
Exactly. So you know those bits are going to heavily adapt, but in terms of like the body paragraphs and whatnot, yes, some parts of those will change, but if you get a question that works perfectly, theoretically, with the question you actually drafted for, then that won't change. So wouldn't you want that to be as polished as possible if that did happen? Right? And the reality is not all of the essay will have to change. I'll just tell you that like 80% will stay. So you want the 80% to sound good. If you have to compromise the other bits, you should do that because you need to make sure you're answering the question. Right? But yeah, please don't buy into the narrative that people who are getting this like high 90s, which is what you should be trying to emulate, whether you're trying to get 90s or not. It doesn't matter. Maybe you're trying to get a band 5. That's fine. Do what the people at the top are trying to do, and then that'll get you closer to that, obviously. And the people at the top either do so much practice that they effectively know the essay they're going to write, so the question, bar the adaptation parts, right? And they're so good at thesis writing because they've done that much practice. Or someone has memorized word for word each thing, timed it so they have enough space at the end and the space in the exam to actually adapt each sentence, and they go in and do that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because the first process of not memorising, that's what I used to do in the HSC. But now that I reflect, I actually find the more essays that I wrote, I ended up saying the same thing for them anyway.
Exactly.
Because what you find is that each of the questions, I mean, the locus of the response is the requirements of the module, right? And every question is going to come back to the rubric and the requirements of the module. So every question is going to be some variation of another question anyway, with some slight differences. So you'll find the more questions you write, the more material is being regurgitated, and you end up candidly, without intention, memorising what you would have pre-prepared anyway. So either way, Johnny's right. I mean, you end up memorising when you go into the exam.
This is what the high achievers are doing, right? That's what we're saying. But if you're someone who's following the strict advice of teachers, don't memorise, it'll all be good, unless you're a super skilled student or a highly talented student at English and someone who's going to take initiative, again, those people are going to do it regardless, I can tell you, right? Does anyone here just do that regardless? Does anyone, how do you prep? You've gone well in essays, I know, for a fact, right?
I practice essays.
Do you practice a lot? Do you practice learning parts?
Topic sentences, thesis statements. I mean, when I have a few quotes that I know well, I know the adjectives that I'll use, this is
Exactly.
meaning language or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'll keep repeating it.
So you're knowing those polished, sophisticated explanations, but you'll then adapt them on the day.
Particularly if you're a student that struggles with expression, right? And there are students out there, if English really isn't your strong subject, knowing how to describe the quote, picking out the technique, you have to memorise that. Otherwise, you're going to panic in the exam and you're going to feel like, how do I phrase that? You get frustrated, start crossing out sentences, and it just starts steamrolling into a panic in the exam. You want to avoid that. Have it pre-prepared, but know, okay, some of it's going to be answering the question, but I do have the comfort of going in there with something that I do know is right in terms of my analysis of the text. So you just got to play to your strengths in that way.
That's right. Okay, so hopefully that's all clear. Does anyone have any questions on that? I think the key point, as you identified, sorry, remind me name. Luke. As Luke identified, what we're saying, and as he pointed out, he said, we're not saying to regurgitate the essay that you learn, right? We're just saying to be practical about it and memorize something, and then all your focus, what were we saying to do the whole week before? Were we saying to memorize the week before? Does anyone remember on the schedule? What was the whole week before based on?
What are you doing the day before?
Yes, you're reciting to ensure you've still got the memorized, but that's already done. What were we doing the whole week before, and especially the day before the exams? Different questions. So don't get the message wrong here, and this is where people are like, they say to memorize. It's that's the first step, right? That's the first step. The next step is to just adapt. So remember, you memorize to the timed requirements, and if you don't time your responses, what are you going to be more inclined to do on the day? Which isn't good. If you don't know how long it's going to take you to write, and suddenly it does take you 40 minutes by the way you're tracking, what are you going to be more inclined to do?
Yeah, what don't you have time for if it takes you the full 40 minutes?
Yeah, and you will stress out. I'm telling you, psychologically, you'll be like, oh my God, I just need to get this essay done. You will just forget all the adaptation rules and all the advice, because on the day, I just know how it feels personally, right? You just will be like, I don't know if I've got enough time, I'm just going to write what I've got. You hear this, people just come out and go, I just wrote my memorize, I'm not thinking about it. Yeah. It's well, you wouldn't have done that if you really had just timed and cut down the essay to begin with, because you didn't feel comfortable going in, because you didn't know. So unless you know how long the essay actually takes, and know that you have got time to spare, you will be tempted, unfortunately, and in stressful moments, you will just do it, and you won't go as well, unfortunately. But you know what? It's better, probably, for lower range students to just do that. It still is, in my opinion, for a lower range student to pump out a full essay memorized, then unfortunately, if you're not good at handling a question on the day, if they haven't memorized and they're just writing something from scratch, I don't think that would go as well, to be honest.
Yeah, I've had students who, English was just their worst subject, right? I've had boys that were failing English, and then the approach for them was just okay, well, you know what? Here, memorize this, put in the exam, and they end up with marks 80 or 85. Okay, so they'll still get a band 5 if they do that, but to get into the band 6, it's the skill in the adaptation. So just know where you're at, be honest with yourself, what are you aiming for, and like I said earlier, play to your strengths.
Yep, awesome. Any questions? Cool. So we'll just go through this vaguely, and we're going to repeat some of this stuff. I really want you to walk out with a very clear mindset for how to approach this stuff, right? Now, remember this doesn't perfectly match the colours that you saw before, but the first stage, remember what's the next 2 to 3 weeks? Editing, drafting, editing, right? You're perfecting the drafts for each response. right? Now this is all, subject to the comprehension skills, which is independent. That's a slightly different form of preparation.
But you might want to memorise, the techniques and the turns
Exactly,
of
you've
phrase.
still got to get familiar with those turns of phrase, how you're going to structure the 3 markers, the 4 markers, know which words you're going to use, the verbs. You all want that to be quick as well. So I know you are perfecting that. You can see the 32/36. I'd probably modify 30. You can do 36 actually, is for the 45-minute essay. Remember that your text and human experiences essay, you get 45 minutes, right? As I said, if you're slow at comprehension, it's still after, you might do a lot of revision and speed up, which is great, then do the 45. But if you need to take 50 out of comprehension, then it reduces it to 40. Then if you know that that's going to be the case, or likely to, then you go back to the 32. Now, remember, the 32-minute is for a fast writer. So if you're a slow writer and you're just not going to get enough down otherwise, what would you want to go up to? Remember what the maximum is for a 40-minute allocation? 35. Now, that's the maximum. Make sure you're not doing any more than that. If you find sentences after you're at 35, don't just be like, 35, oh, that's great, I'm done. If you see, I could take that out as well, and I'm still saying enough, I'm still covering the essential requirements of the module, then take more out. The closer you are to the 32, the better. Okay, that's the rule. But I don't want you to sacrifice core content, like where you've got 2 quotes in a paragraph, because you're trying so hard to get to 32. But we'll go through the minimum requirements, what those are, and then try and build around them and make everything else as tight as possible. Okay, then obviously after you perfect, you're going to memorize. And I put an arrow here to say practice new questions, because what we have already foregrounded is there's 2 ways of memorizing, and I think you should engage in both. There's direct and indirect. What's the direct way of memorizing? After you've timed the draft, so let's say I'm a slow writer. Let's say I'm at 34 minutes with my Module A essay, okay? I've got it reviewed. What do? You get it reviewed by teachers, get it reviewed by peers if you can. Make all the edits. You want it polished. You want to think this is a 20 out of 20, or this is as good as I can write to the draft question that I've used. Make sure you use a draft question. Don't write the generics. They're just not as helpful because you're not in the mindset to use the words of the question. So once you do that, we've got here the indirect way of memorizing. Let me go back to direct memorizing. So you print out the Module A, the 34-minute essay in this example, right? Print it out, and then you go through a memorization process. Now, what that looks like, we've got stuff on YouTube actually that you should look. Just say Ignite how to memorize. Go to YouTube and type that in, and I go through a step-by-step. I won't go through it all now. But basically, it's like a line-by-line process of reading it, right? Read it off the page. Say it out loud. Don't look. Can you say the whole thing without looking? If not, do it again. Do it till you can do it. Then do the next sentence. Then say both sentences. And then you do that to the end of the paragraph. So say it's the introduction, right? And once you can say the whole introduction out loud with the paper in your hand, but without looking, then you're good to start the process for the next one. But you don't move on till you get the previous one. Now that's the grueling process of direct memorization, which will pay big dividends, as we've said. It'll pay off because you'll be so fast, and all you think about on the day is adaptation. The other way you can memorize, which is what you should also do, which will make things a little bit more natural and it'll just be more gradual, which is what Layla was getting at. Remember what Layla said? By the time she got to the exam, she effectively did know what she was going to write as a draft, as a kind of core essay. And that's by practicing new questions. So you practice doing your response to new questions, and by the more times you do that, you're going to naturally learn more of the essay, right? So you want to do both. You want to make sure you can definitely recite the whole essay out without looking, but also just by actually writing essays to new questions, right, is another way of indirectly absorbing the material.
But at the bare minimum, even with the indirect process, I still had like a mind map summary of what my points were, broad points, and my evidence and the techniques associated with them. So even though I hadn't written out a draft, I still had, I know paragraph 1, 2, and 3 is loosely going to be based on these things. These are the quotes that I'm going to be drawing on, and then I just kind of learnt how I was going to express those ideas and the logical progression through them by writing the different essays. So even at the bare minimum, you still got to know, okay, what are my paragraphs going to be? What's my evidence? And then you go from there. Because you can't walk in that exam and not know what quotes you're going to use. That would be a disaster, I think.
Oh yeah, of course. And like that's it. Like when I quotes is just so bare minimum. It's like, I think I wouldn't go in there without knowing how I phrase the meaning of that quote.
Yeah, or group them at least.
Exactly. Like there's so much more than a quote to the sentence. A quote's nothing, right? It's something, but it's very minimal in terms of what's going to get you the marks. The marks are going to come from the sophistication of how you explain the technique ascribed to that quote or to the form attached, right? So that's an absolute bare minimum, and it's insufficient to just know quotes, in my opinion, as we make clear. Okay, and then what's the last thing? You've done the memorize, you've practiced new questions, you do the adaptation, for as much of that last week as possible. Really try and put pressure on yourself. It's good to have a little bit of pressure, a little bit of stress, right? Healthy amount to force yourself to learn these essays and responses before you go into the week before the exam, right? If you can make it seem to yourself like the exam is a week earlier than what it really is, and if that's going to encourage you to learn that material, that's going to really benefit you. That'll be very hard to do. Not everyone here will do it. But if you do it, you'll be so far ahead of the game because you have a whole week to spare now on just adapting.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, the whole point of trying so hard for these trials is so that when you get those results back, if all of these essays are good and you know they work, then it alleviates a lot of the pressure going to the HSC, right? Because then you're not having to go through that process of rescaffolding. Then, between the trials and the HSC, 100% of the focus is just practicing, and you'll be much more calm going into the HSC exams, knowing that, well, I did well in the trials, these essays are good, I know they work, it just comes back to that skill of adaptation in the exam. So you might think, oh, you know, trials are only 30, 40%, whatever you're thinking, put that effort in because it will pay off again for you in the long run when you actually sit the HSC as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's funny you say that. Like, in my head, this prep strategy is the same for the HSC. There's nothing different. Funnily enough, though, if you do everything that we said, you know, to the book here, as I said, when you get to the HSC, more of those weeks are just going to be adaptation and practice because you will forget parts of your essay, obviously, and you'll have some time off after trials, could have a week or two break or whatever. And once you get back into the study routine, from there, you'll pick those essays up so quickly, you'll make the edits, you know, you'll see where you lost some marks.
Yeah, incorporate the feedback.
And incorporate the feedback from trials into the HSC, but the process is going to be so much easier if you put in the work now before trials. And it is a trial, you treat it like the HSC, and it will make prep for the HSC way more manageable, and you'll be prioritising the right things, which isn't, as we said, it's not memorising, that's not the priority, it's just an essential minimum requirement, as we said.
But
right?
the harder you go now, and the more you perfect your skills in this period, means you'll do even better in the actual HSC. And the more you outperform in the actual HSC mark will also help to, you know, scale your internal mark as well. So go all in, get that feedback, perfect your responses for the HSC, and it just works better for you in the long run when you consider how the process of the HSC works. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So it's an investment for pre-actual HSC, and you'll do it for your future self, right? Your future self will thank you. Be like, oh, thank goodness, thank you for doing that back at trials, because now I've got that hard work done. I can just focus on, you know, much more relaxed, just focus on hitting new questions, incorporate that feedback, way less stressful. So if you can, you know, just think, you know, a couple of months' time, or 2 to 3 months, think about where you want to be there. You want to be to a place where you're looking back going, yes, I put in the hard work, now I'm here. But you've got to be disciplined to do that.
That's right. And hopefully you also realise now that there's not that much content for English, right? It's not a very content-heavy subject. It's actually quite streamlined. So between trials and HSC, if you need that extra time to learn the content for your history or your humanities, or you need that extra time for maths, you have that time now because you've got all the content set for English. It's just those moments of practice and adaptation, and then it helps your ATAR overall because you can actually use time proportionately to the more content-heavy subjects. So nail English now, streamline your approach, and it works better for you in terms of all your preparation.
That's it. Any questions on that? It's as much motivation as we can probably jam into you. Yeah. Whether you take it or leave it. Hopefully you come out of this on a bit of a high and you're like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then you've got to stick to it.
And not feel overwhelmed. That's what we're
That's right. That's right. Remember, factor in those rests and stuff as appropriately. You need to add more of that time for yourself. Let's do it. I just recommend, I don't really care how much time you are not working. I think, do you get the principle? It's that you schedule the time not working. Because it means then you're more likely to follow the time where you are meant to be working. So it doesn't really matter to me. You can have 3 rest days or whatever, you know, not that I would personally do that, but if, again, it's all about what your aim is. And if you're like, no, I just can't do that myself, I get overwhelmed really easily. Well, don't punish yourself, but schedule it. Just schedule it, and that will make all the difference because it means you're more likely to stick to the actual time where you should be working. Does that make sense? So we're not asking you to adhere to that exact schedule that we said, and we care about like mental health and anxiety and stress and stuff like that. So we're not at all trying to push you in a bad direction there. We're saying, look, that's one potential, but you have to know yourself and you have to know what you're capable of dealing with, right? So I just think make it work for you, but schedule it. You get the principle?
Plan and set those goals. You know, by this day, this goal needs to be fulfilled, and whatever strategic way you have about going about it, just make sure you stick to that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we've talked about before the exam in enough detail. Does everyone feel like they get the before the exam protocol? Again, we'll send you those things that you can build on, and we know that we want all the priority, all the focus to be on adaptation in the exam. Okay, so don't misconstrue the memorization message. That's just part 2 here, isn't it? Okay, so here are the key principles in terms of drafting, right? I'll just make sure these are overall principles I think I've got. Yeah, so let me go through these. Okay, remember, we're not going in depth in any particular essay. Everyone's doing different things here. So we're just, as we said, we're running a couple of essay-specific ones, but these are just general principles for your preparation for the draft essays. Okay, and then I'll do a section at the end on craft. So we're going for time. Cool. Okay, so 10 minutes on this, 10 minutes on craft, and hopefully you walk away with a good enough knowledge of how to go about each section.
And you can revise the slides in your own time as well. Yeah.
That's right. So create a broad progressive structure with form as your primary evidence, right? Now, we've already talked about form. Layla defined it for you. That was in the context of comprehension. It's far more important, in my opinion, because it's inevitable that you will need to talk about it for each essay you do. For every essay you do, we want an aspect of form in each body paragraph, right? Now, what we mean by form are those macro compositional choices. For instance, if it's prose fiction, might be talking about the narrative voice. Is it first person? Is it third person? Why? Or so what, rather, is the question. What do you take from that? What's the importance of it being a first person narration, right? So you have to think about that. If it's film, then you're talking more about the cinematography, how it's shot. Is there any, often lighting, that often films have a certain theme or motif with the lighting, and they're shot in a certain way, and it makes them quite unique. Maybe there's lots of still shots, right? Maybe the soundtrack's important. Of course it's going to be. Is there no soundtrack, right? That's called non-diegetic, right? Sound that can't be heard by the characters, that only you can hear. And then you can talk about dialogue and other diegetic noises that are within the film. These are just examples, right? Okay, anyway, you would want to hone in on a specific one at least once within each body paragraph. And I think with Mod A especially, but just with any, my preference would be doing as much as you can. That's just the bare minimum. You want to push yourself, do it twice. I guarantee you will distinguish yourself just by mentioning form instead of similes and metaphors on repeat. Okay? Very simple way to improve your appeal to the marker. And, of course, that's only by achieving what you should be doing, which is appreciating parts of a text that really deserve your primary attention, right? Which are the big choices that they make, right? Well, of course, you should look at those mostly, really, because the smaller things are complementary, but they're not the distinctive features often of the text, right? So, what's this? With the drafting, if you struggle with general drafting of body paragraphs, right? And whenever I'm sitting with a student and planning out an essay, I don't start with the introduction. I start with 3 topic sentences. I said once we go through, I don't start there. We do analysis of the text, talk about the ideas, and we go, okay, how can we structure this into 3 topic sentences? This is if it was on one text. 4 bodies if you're doing a comparative. Module A, if you're comparing 2 texts, which is the Module A one, then you can have text 1, text 2, text 1, text 2, right? There's other ways of doing it as well. But with 3 bodies, I always examine, especially for text and human experiences, if you struggle with structuring that essay, make your first body paragraph be about the particular conflict that is going on in the text or that you perceive in the text. What's the key conflict that is established kind of in the first stage or first part of the text, if you like? Thinking about it chronologically is very helpful, right? So don't dismiss that as an option. It's not, maybe it's a little bit overly simplifying of the text and how it's put together, but I think it's a very good starting point. I think you can definitely get full marks by kind of placing all your evidence in almost a chronological order, right? And why can you do that as well? Because remember, is form based on where is form only going to be at this very start of the text? No, so, right, because form is something that occurs throughout the whole text. Does everyone get that? So if you mention form in every body paragraph, it's not like you're only you're just taking from page 1, then 5, then 7, then page 20, you're not doing it like that. Form covers the whole thing anyway, so you are showing an overall appreciation of the text. I would just use the micro evidence. I think it's good to hone in chronologically as it occurs, kind of through conflict, then through a struggle body paragraph, then through resolution.
Yeah, and just to add, for your trials, if your school has prescribed a different structure of the essay, if they want 4 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs comparative, go with that for the trial. But if you felt it didn't work for you, you can obviously change it for the HSC. But for the internal assessments, play it to your marker, do what they want, and then you can change it for the HSC. Yeah,
definitely. And that goes for anything we've said, really. It's kind of qualified by, if you've had explicit instructions from your teacher, and if your essays are going to be marked internally, then don't follow what we're saying for the trials. If they've said do something completely different, do that. I mean, that would just be silly, right? But what we're saying is general advice that would work. If you're at Ignite school, that's what we would be saying. But if you're at your school, so cater that for at least for the trials. If it doesn't work, if you don't get rewarded for it, maybe you want a different structure. This is a different possibility for you. Okay. So conflict struggle would be the second body paragraph in that one. So it's hard to understand this kind of without an example, but I don't want to discriminate against the text here. But just what's a conflict means, like what's the individual in the text struggling to achieve generally, or is there a collective conflict between people having individuality, right? So if I'm just thinking about general themes across these texts. Is it a struggle to be an individual, right? And then is there someone trying to exert power on them? So there's a conflict between the individual who wants to have their own individuality, but then there might be another force in the text which is trying to assert authority over them, right? Is anyone's text like that? If anyone does 1984 or The Crucible, then it should be a yes. These things it's power dynamic, it's with power play, right? It's in every single text.
It might be on more of a personal level. If you're someone who's looking at, Billy Elliot or Past the Shallows, you have more familial context of that conflict. But on the more kind of broad political level, Crucible, Merchant of Venice even, 1984, they all deal with some sort of conflict between an individual against society or between two individuals. And then in the next paragraph, you'll go into...
That's right. So I was using struggle there loosely because I want that to be there. But the point is, what's the key conflict that you can identify? There's no one right answer. I should say that. You just have to define it with specificity and know that you can back it up with at least 3 pieces of evidence, and ideally one of those pieces of evidence is complemented by what's the primary consideration? Everyone say it? Primary part of evidence? Form. Everyone say it? Form, right. So we want to have form in there that can, an aspect of form that plays into the conflict that you identify. Do you see that? It's not like, there's a soundtrack in this and I'll just slot that in the first body paragraph for no reason. Put it in the body paragraph where it best fits, right? So there's a rule of best fit. Where does the evidence best go into in terms of these? And then how is it best ordered within the paragraph? Everything should be ordered logically, and you'll have a nice argument, easy to follow for the marker. Oh, you're making that point, you're saying that leads to that. Oh, and that's a consequence of that. Very easy to see, right? Oh, you've talked about form, you're backing it up with clear techniques and quotes. That's great. You've actually linked part of that to context. Awesome. It's like, that was a great body paragraph. Next one. You see? So we want logical flow. That's what this first point's about. And then, of course, so after you have that conflict, the second body paragraph, you talk about the struggle out of it. Are there any forces that are making it difficult to overcome the conflict that you identified? Okay, so then you focus on a different aspect of the text. And presumably that's as you move through the text, maybe you get to the middle of the text, whether it's the middle of the film, middle of the play, middle of the novel, then you're analysing, you're trying to characterise the key struggle that they're facing and how that is reflected in the text, right? Again, no one right answer, you just have to be specific about what it is, right? Everyone just say, be specific. Be specific. It's really important, right? It's the key to all your analysis. It's the key, I should say, to sophistication. Always maintain that. If you're not specific about what the effect of a technique is, it's not going to sound that great. But if you give me something very detailed and I can see a specific connection, that's impressive, right? That's what markers will be impressed by, when you're very specific about the effect. You're not just saying, oh, and this reveals isolation. It's like, that's not impressive, that's not specific, I don't even know if that would get a mark, right? Yeah. But if you said, this reveals the power of social pressures to isolate an individual, in order to compel them to conform. So you're very specific. Okay, that's a very narrow concept there that you've explored to that, which you've related to that technique. That's far more impressive, right?
It's also important to remember the specificity when you're discussing context as well, yeah? When you're looking at context, don't just say, World War II was influencing George Orwell when he wrote 1984. What specific aspect and how is it manifested in the text? Same goes for your discussion of key ideas in Module B, or if you use a critic. Yeah, don't speak generally, hone in and be specific in the analysis.
That's right. And what I certainly don't want you to do is to take away, I have to mention form in every body paragraph, and then you literally just say the word form. It's like, what form? Like, if it's a play, by the way, you start at the biggest level. Does anyone know how you could phrase that? If you just wanted to talk about how it's a play, how would you get form in there? Do you know? It's the dramatic form, right?
Theatrical.
So you might say dramatic form as a term in the introduction, but if you then want to say dramatic form again in a body paragraph, what should you try and do in addition to that, right? You're saying the dramatic form, that literally just says it's a play. So do you want to say something else about it? Should we? to be more specific, we should maybe say that it's the fact that it's something we say about dramatic form is that it's performed live for a theatre, right? So maybe you would say the visceral impact, visceral means you feel it because you're in the audience, you're seeing it right in front of you, right? You say the visceral impact created by the dramatic form. Okay, that's a specific mention of form for quite a broad feature, right? Because you're not even going into any element of the dramatic form, you're just saying the fact it's a play.
Yeah, or you might tie in the genre as well to the analysis. If it's a tragic play, if it's a comedy, if it's a romance, how does that implicate the meaning as well?
Yeah, and that's the broadest way you could do it. And then after that, if you're thinking about a play, go with this dramatic form example, you might talk about the stage directions and give a specific example of a stage direction and say this makes up a larger part of the dramatic form is the excessive use of stage directions. And then you give a quote as an example. Do you see? That's how specific you have to be when you do mention form. So don't just mention it loosely and go, oh yeah, ticked it. It's like it's not going to be enough to really impress the marker, and you're not going to do a good enough job of actually analysing the form in itself. We want you to do it correctly, right? Okay, so been through that. The last thing here, the third body, if you want to have a third body paragraph, is you want to say, is there any aspect of resolution to the problem that the composer has explored, right? Very useful way to view any text is there being a problem and a potential solution. Sometimes you don't see any solution in the text, right? Does anyone have a text like that where it's kind of, there's an attempted resolution, right? Like even 1984, you see an attempt for there to be, right, through like rebellion and things like that, and then you see it kind of squashed at the end, right? So you would talk about any effort to resolve the problem, and you would say whether that's successful or not, and why. Why was it successful? Why was it not? Was there no solution at all? Was there just another further problematic consequence? So was the individual's identity like taken away from them? Was the individuality deprived by the state, who's trying to suppress everyone so they can exert that power over them? And then what's the consequence of it? Then you might say, well, then everyone loses their ability to think freely, and there might be a further consequence to that they lose familial connection. It's like, okay, so now you're going to focus on loss of familial connection as a consequence of identity being taken away. Do you see that? So there doesn't have to be a positive aspect to your text. Don't make one up. But you could certainly talk about an attempt to resolve the problem in the text, right? And also, one last thing on this is, in terms of the resolution of a text, what should you always keep in mind? Like, who's trying to solve the problem by writing the text or by making the text? Who's trying to resolve the problem themselves? The author or the composer, more generally. Very good. See that? The composer is putting it out there, often to heighten awareness. They're making the reader or the viewer aware of the problem. So a nice one that comes in the resolution is the fact that the authorial intent, the intent of the author or the intent of the composer is actually to make you aware of the problem. Do you see? And then the awareness in itself is part of the way of resolving the problem. Everyone following? Okay. Anything to add on that? Okay, cool. So this is key. I think, this is what I want to hone in, and I'll probably use the remainder of the essay time on this. Make the question work for you, not the other way around. Okay? Now, this ties into the whole memorizing thing. We want to memorize a nice, broad, progressive structure. Do you see how these play into each other? The reason you do that is it's nice and malleable. It's adaptable. It's adaptable to new questions because you're covering the fundamental bases of conflict, struggle, and resolution, which is they're not like theme-based necessarily. Do you see that? So if your question gives you a random theme, like, we're talking about the Crucible, there was this question on love that threw everyone, right? Because the Crucible's not explicitly about it, but it is if you frame it the right way, right? But it's not obvious, I should say. It's not obvious, so it throws a lot of people. But if you frame something in terms of conflict, struggle, and resolution, what are you trying to do? Reword the conflict in terms of what the question? Anyone? Asks, right? Did you all get this? It's a key point. So if you've just talked about the key conflict of like the individual's autonomy, right? By that we mean the individuality being taken away by someone who's trying to get power from you, right? If you talk about that conflict, and then you talk about love, and then love comes in, right? A question like love, and you're talking about someone's autonomy being taken away, you just reframe it so that you say, as part of that process of taking it away, they try to disrupt the love of the community or something like that, right? You've got to talk about a positive word in like a negative way to make it work in that example. Are you following that example? So if you were talking about something very negative, that the individual is losing their autonomy, their ability to think for themselves because of like the state is trying to take it away so they can control them, If you're talking about that, and then you get a question, love, as the key word, it's like, how does it explore love? And then you're like, oh my God, what do I do here? It's like, well, I talked about the conflict. Now let me reword the conflict in terms of love. But I'm saying the same thing. You see? So the essence of what you're saying will not change in each body paragraph. And that's exactly why if you use evidence underneath each of these these labels, they're going to work for any question, I guarantee you, because you're going to make the question work for you by just reiterating what you're saying or rewording what you were saying so that you include the word of the question in an appropriate way. Does that make sense? So we get love, we're talking about something negative. Well, we're going to talk about a lack of love, an absence of it. Well, there's no love. Or the love's being taken away, or the love between a family is being disrupted. Do you see? So we're talking about an absence of a positive thing in order to accommodate the negative essence of our body paragraph. Do we all see that? So that answers that. If you get a word that is the complete opposite, it's not that bad. You just say it's the absence of it in the text. You'll see that? And that's what people missed with that particular question. There was an HSC question, as I said, which last year in the new syllabus, there's a question on love on a text that is about there not really being any love. Well, there are minute instances of it and particular dynamics with love, but if you were talking about the text generally, you wouldn't usually use that word.
Yeah, and you could consider, I mean, we won't go into depth, but for those of you who are doing the Crucible, love thy neighbour, right, the Christian kind of parable, where that text is all about self-preservation, right? So it's just an example of how you can take the key word and construe it in a different way to make it work for what you're going to say. So when you're talking about conflict, it's conflict between individuals within the text because they fail to recognise the love thy neighbour like you love yourself, right, which is part of Miller's kind of intention right in the text. So the point is, construe it in the way that works for you in your essay to make it work for what you've pre-prepared.
Yeah, and I'll stick with that example and I'll say it's not just about framing the word negatively like in that example, but as I indicated there, it's also about redirecting someone's love. These are just examples of how you could do it for your text, right? Redirecting, like, love who? Oh, well, instead of loving your family or yourself, we want you to love the state, that is the government, right? Or we want you to love the church or the value system that we're trying to... So what are they trying to make you love? So maybe they're trying to make you love something in a bad way. Do you see what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
So if you have to be creative with how you use the word they give you in the question for an essay.
Or in the case of 84, right, the danger of love, because once you initiate a sense of passion for somebody else, it actually diverts attention away from the state. So that's how you could have construed that word in light of that text with that structure of the conflict, right?
That's right, and that's a good example with the 1984 one. You might construe the word or you might reiterate it differently in each paragraph. You see? So it's on love. It's like, well, for conflict, it's about they want to make us love, Big Brother in that example. They want to make us love someone else and not ourselves or not our family, right? And then you go further and you say, but however, loving someone else who is potentially, rebellious, that's a danger to loving the other person. So you've got to adapt. You've got to adapt what you have to what the question is. But remember, your pre-existing scaffold is governing how you are to interpret the key words of the question.
Yeah. And that harks back to what I said earlier about the way you define the words in the question to suit what you want to say in the comprehension, right? It's the same principle here. Let your evidence govern the thesis, because if you come up with a thesis that can't be sustained, you're going to lose focus in the essay and it just won't link to the question.
Yeah, very important point there, that with the thesis writing as well, we're not just talking about bodies here, but when you actually construct the new thesis, right, the new thesis, there still needs the paradigm or the framework of the thesis still needs to accommodate your body paragraphs.
That's right.
So don't go too far from your bodies and your evidence of the fundamental essence of your essay. Yeah. You need to then make the question work. You need to basically reconstruct a thesis that's very meaningful, but make sure you word it in a way that is getting to the ideas of your body paragraphs.
That's right. Foresight is a really important word when you're drafting that thesis. Have foresight. What is my actual evidence? Am I constructing an argument here that can be sustained with what I want to write and what I have pre-prepared?
Exactly. Any questions on that? Because that's kind of the key thing I just wanted to cover with this. You can read over these. We'll send you anything because we can't go through everything on this. But I think we've talked about using the actual words of the question. What do people like to use instead of the actual words when they get an essay or comprehension? What do they like to use? Synonyms. Yeah. Anyone do that? Anyone think they feel like, I've got to use a word that's, it's kind of a bizarre thing. I've got to use a word that's not the word of the question. It's like, what?
Don't do that.
What?
Answer the question.
None of you do it? Okay, that's good. A lot of people do, right? They think, I'll be clever here and use a synonym. It's like, but they didn't use the synonym in the question. Why? Just use the actual word. Now, what's the trap? People use the actual word without what?
What did I say? Apply the micro questions and unpack.
Yeah, they don't unpack it, meaning they don't expand it, they don't use it in a meaningful way. They just repeat the question, they repeat the word. So that's not what you want to do. You've got to go the whole way here. Use the actual word, but use it in a meaningful way. How do you use it in a meaningful way? Ask yourself, if the word was love, what type of love? Love who? So what about, right? Like how, why, what? Ask those questions and then answer that in your thesis statement or in the topic sentence or whatever you're doing. Okay, now we'll go, you guys can look back over this, but we've really kind of covered all of this anyway with the drafting.
We frame the slides as like a set of notes for you in a way, so don't be panicked that we're skipping through them.
Well, these are checklists for you guys to go over throughout the process, okay? So just kind of noting that they're there. Introduction elements, something you should have in every introduction. Tried to make an acronym here, right? That's an example of it. It's not a perfect one, but it's FAT Corp, even though Corp obviously has an O, I made it a Q, right? So if you wanted to know what these mean down, that's F for form. Form needs to be mentioned in your introduction. A, what did I just say? You don't want to use synonyms, you want to use? Actual words of the question. So that's actual words of the question. T, obviously is getting at the theme, but if you want to make a note here, don't say the word theme, just say what the concept is. But T for theme. C for? Context. Good, you should mention something about context. These are in all introductions. Q, obviously you should make sure you are expanding on the question. You want to use actual words of the question, but you need to expand on the question and answer it in a meaningful way. R, you want to try and use some terms from the rubric. And P, if you're going to mention a text or a poem or whatever, you want to have something to do with the plot, like what happens in that text, and that might be half a sentence of your introduction. Just set us in context, right? If it was 1984, as Winston, as he attempts to rebel against Big Brother, and then you go into like form and stuff. Orwell uses this form to right? Just mention the aspects of plot so we know what you're talking about. Any questions on that? Everyone got that down? Okay, now we're at time there. Is everyone good to go like 5 minutes over so I can just run through the craft?
I told most parents it would be 1:45.
Oh, cool. Everyone good with that? Just get through now the polishing. Key thing there to take away, again, checklist for you guys to review. Read your drafts aloud so you can spot the bits in your essays which don't flow. Because sometimes you'll read it and you'll be like, oh, and then you'll realize a comma should be there or something like that. Or I don't need that part of the sentence. Or that doesn't flow into the next sentence. So they're things that come actually from reading out loud. Very simple tip, very effective though. Right? Like if I do any work now, like uni assignments, essays, it's a grueling process again, very grueling, but very rewarding because you are spotting yourself. I go through every single sentence again and again. If I'm tutoring like students, they probably think I'm like, oh, what's going on? We've only got through like the introduction. Yeah. I have to read it out loud. Every time I make an edit, I go back and I read it, right? So I make an edit to the second sentence. They're probably like, oh, okay, yep, third sentence. I'm like, no. I'm going to read the first sentence, now the second sentence to see how that works. Remember, it's an essay. It's a whole, it's not just like one piece. It's a whole thing.
And it might flow to you, but to someone who hasn't read your work before, you've got to try and put yourself in their position. Your work always sounds worse when somebody else reads it because you're biased towards your own words. Yeah.
That's right. Okay, cool. So, and then the last thing, teacher and peer feedback. Obviously, that's something you do in the next 3 weeks. Sooner the better. Get the drafting done, send it in. If your teacher's kind enough to look at a draft, or you can get friends who are, obviously don't send it to people who you think are not going to have insight on it, but someone who's going for a similar level, or ideally, if you're someone in the middle or at the bottom of the year, try and ask someone nicely at the top and say, hey, do you mind giving me a few tips on my response? It used to happen all the time in my year. Because our year was really good at coming together and helping each other. So a few of us would get sent 5 to 10 essays from other kids who, weren't going as well. And we just read through them. We just go, yeah, change this. You don't have to you don't have to do a whole hour on it. You can just say, hey, you should make this tighter, this better, right? So if you're someone at the top, you can get feedback from other people at the top, but you should also help other people from your cohort as well. It's actually in your interest to make everyone go better. But won't go into the details of that. Actually will make everyone go better. But yeah, get in small groups, send it to 1 or 2 people. If you've got a tutor, there's that. If you've got a teacher, additional resource. So use that in that drafting phase. Timing, everyone's clear on the timing. You can check that off in each one. Slow or right is 35 minutes. Memorization, we've talked about that. The adaptation, you can look at this. We've told you the key parts to adapt, hopefully. Intro, topic, sentences, links. Remember, we foregrounded that at the start. How you explain your evidence, which will not change, right? Which basically will not change. How you explain it will change is a medium level of change, because there might be a better word you could now use to articulate what you were saying in order to accommodate for the question, right? Perhaps it's as easy as substituting one word you had for the word of the question. That's the best case, right? Maybe you'll have to reword a phrase or a clause to make it suit. Okay? And then we've talked about this. So I would want to do more detail on that, but just due to time, if you get a question, the first thing you'll do is identify the key terms of the question. By identify key terms, I don't mean how. It's not the same like with the comprehend. I don't mean the hows. I mean, what is there a theme? Right? Is there love? Oh, how does it represent love? Or is there, how does it use form to represent love? How does the composer use form to represent love? Two key words there, form and love. What do I do with those two key words? And this is what you think about in the first couple of minutes. What do you do? Everyone say? Well, it's up there. You apply the mini questions or micro questions, right? Everyone clear on that? So I see the word form. Someone tell me a word that I would ask myself to ensure that I answer that mini question in the thesis. Let's go through the questions. Everyone say, repeat after me. What type? How? Why? So what? Right? They're like 4 key ones. So which one would you apply for form? Form. What type or right? What form? So what would you say? Oh, it's a play through the dramatic form. Oh, he's like, oh, he uses soliloquies and stuff like that. Then you say a couple of those. Then it says love. Okay, love. What key words? Yeah, how, because it's how does it represent love? But how is love represented? But any other ones? So what? Yeah, what's the implication of it talking about love? And what does that get at? What's the composer trying to do? Are they trying to wake us up to something? Right? Yep. And just on that, the other thing, what type? It's a very good question. It's just such a good way of labeling what type of love. Because in your thesis, if you just say the word love versus saying the actual type, communal love, individual love, self-love, do you see how much it already sounds better? You're unpacking just with the one word before the actual word, just with the adjective, you're already breaking it down. Does everyone see that?
Yep, and just with regards to form, you might want to ask why the composer used that formal mode, because that will link to authorial intent as well.
Yeah, that's great. So some words are already built into the question. Like in that example, I said, how does form represent love? So you don't need to say how attached to love necessarily, but you can say what type of love, so what, they're good ones, right? It might only be 1 or 2 mini questions. And by answering those, you are effectively breaking down the question, but you're still going to use those terms in a meaningful way. Does everyone see that? Cool, okay. So what we've got here as well, you can look at later, just some sample questions, different types of questions for, let's say, text and human experiences. Then you've got Module A types of questions that you can apply, whether it's advanced or standard. Then you've got Module B types of questions, right?
So these will be useful for you in those weeks before the exam, right? You can go through these slides and do practices.
Yeah, this is in the adaptation weeks. Remember, adaptation, you actually start kind of like week 4, week 5, and then you're only doing adaptation in the last week, is the ideal. So these are some questions you could do, introductions, topic sentences, and links for.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you do like the content, subscribe to our channel and we'll have more videos coming your way.
That's right, guys. Thanks for watching. And please make sure you check out our online resource database. We've had a team of state rank achievers and heads of English put these together for you, covering everything from essay structures and examples all the way through to craft of writing and comprehension skills. So check them out at ignitehsc.com.au and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.